Sex abuse verdict. An Australian court upholds convictions against Cardinal George Pell. We have a report and analysis. The Jewish vote. President Trump says any Jew voting Democratic is uninformed or disloyal. We're at the White House. Hong Kong protests. Hundreds of protesters hold a sit-in at a train station to mark 1 month since a violent attack on supporters of the anti-government movement. And actions speak louder than words. The Holy Father warns against hypocrisy and urges good Christians to be generous. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, August 21st, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. An Australian appeals court has upheld convictions against Cardinal George Pell. He's the highest-ranking Catholic official to be found guilty of sexually abusing children. While abuse survivors are cheering the decision, Catholics close to the Cardinal are calling it a miscarriage of justice.
You're the devil! You're evil! You're a monster!
In December, a jury found the former Vatican finance minister guilty of molesting two 13-year-old choir boys in Melbourne's St. Patrick's Cathedral more than 2 decades ago. This morning, a Victoria State Court rejected the Cardinal's appeal in a 2-1 ruling. In the end, it came down to Pell's word against his accusers.
Justice Maxwell and I accepted the prosecution's submission that the complainant was a very compelling witness, was clearly not a liar, was not a fantasist, and was a witness of truth.
The Vatican has acknowledged the decision and expressed its respect for the Australian judicial system. It said its own investigation into Pell would await the outcome of any final appeal in Australia.
As the proceedings continue to develop, the Holy See recalls that the Cardinal has always maintained his innocence throughout the judicial process, and it is his right to appeal to the High Court.
One of the choir boys was the key prosecution witness. The other boy died of a heroin overdose in 2014 at the age of 31, without ever complaining he had been abused. His father attended today's court hearing with his lawyer.
He described a feeling of elation once the verdict had been handed down, and then sitting with him more recently once it's had a chance to sink in. I think that he describes a real feeling of relief.
Pell's lawyers will consider an appeal to Australia's High Court, according to a spokesperson. Cardinal Pell is obviously disappointed with the decision, her statement said. He has always maintained his innocence.
I'm innocent of these charges. They are false. The whole idea of sexual abuse is abhorrent to me.
Hannah Brockhouse, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency, joins us from Rome. Hannah, what was Cardinal Pell's reaction today in court?
Wyatt, today after the decision was read in court, Cardinal Pell had no visible reaction on his face. He was wearing his collar, but he did not have his cardinal's ring. Later in the day, he released a statement through a spokesperson where he said he was obviously disappointed in the decision. He noted the 2-1 split between the judges in that decision and said that he continues to maintain his innocence as he has done. He also thanked his many supporters.
The Vatican is conducting its own investigation into Cardinal Pell. Is there an update on how it is proceeding?
Yes, back in March, the Vatican announced that it would do its own investigation into Cardinal Pell, and it said at that time that they would wait until the end of the Australian judicial proceedings, including any appeal processes. So today we received an update on that, and they said they will continue to wait to see if Cardinal Pell files another appeal with the Australian High Court, which he may choose to do. And until then, they are waiting, as they said before. That canonical proceeding would take place in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith.
Okay, well, Hannah, as you know, there has been lots of reaction on this decision. What are church leaders saying in Australia?
Well, Australian bishops released a statement through the Bishops' Conference today in which they expressed their support of victims of abuse. 2 archbishops also gave separate statements. Those were Archbishop Fisher of Sydney and Archbishop Comensoli of Melbourne. Archbishop Comensoli of Melbourne said that he also expresses his support for victims of abuse, and that he would be willing to give support to Cardinal Pell in prison, the pastoral support that is called for through Jesus' teachings to visit the imprisoned. Archbishop Fisher also recognized in his statement the feelings that some Catholics might have in the wake of this decision, especially those who knew Cardinal Pell and may be feeling that the decision does not align with the man that they knew. And he offered his encouragement of faith, hope, and love.
Okay, we'll be watching to see if there's another appeal there in Australian court, and obviously we'll continue to keep our eye on the Vatican investigation as well. Hannah Brockhouse, Senior Rome Correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Joining me now for more analysis is Edward Condon, D.C. Bureau Chief for Catholic News Agency. Ed, welcome back. This is a case, as we mentioned, has divided the Catholic community. The abuse survivors see it as a major victory. Other supporters of the Cardinal called it travesty. Can you just briefly walk us through the case, and why do you think it's been so, or evoked such a polarized response?
Well, the judges both at the jury trial level and at the appeal court level have recognized that this has really divided not just Australian society, but wider opinion across the world. Now, on the one hand, sexual abuse has been a huge problem and scandal for the church, almost at a global level, and certainly in Australia as much as anywhere else. So I think a lot of abuse survivors and advocates in Australia are seeing the opportunity to bring any senior figure, let alone one as high as Cardinal Pell, to law as itself a victory for abuse survivors. On the other hand, those who've been following the case closely, paying close attention to the evidence that's been presented, has said basically he's been convicted on the word of one person who claims to be a victim. Now, they'd also note that the second supposed victim of Pell in this case, who died in 2015, before he died, he made it very clear. He told his mother, he said he was never abused. So there are a lot of questions raised about the level of evidence that was brought against Cardinal Pell and whether or not he's basically been convicted for the crimes of the church more widely.
We mentioned the Vatican statement. What do you make of that? I mean, do you see this as a subtle sign of support?
I don't know that I'd say it's a subtle sign of support. I'd say it's more a sign of surprise on the Vatican's part. I think they weren't expecting to see this decision. I think a lot of people weren't. If you look at the Australian media in the days leading up to the release of this decision on Wednesday, the ground was really being prepared for most likely a retrial or possibly even Pell's exoneration. And that's not what we got at all. So I think the Vatican, like everyone else, is really reacting with a certain amount of surprise to this decision.
Okay, so what do you think happens next year in the process, and do you expect the Cardinal to appeal?
Well, there's no doubt that his supporters certainly want him to appeal. They maintain his innocence, as the Cardinal himself has, and says he needs to take every avenue open to him. There are those close to the Cardinal there who say that he's, in a sense, accepted that he's being martyred. Is how I heard one friend of his describe it. And it's, it's open to question how much fight he really has left in him. He's 78 years old. This has been a long process. Of course, on the other hand, the fact that he can appeal by no means guarantees that the High Court in Canberra would accept the appeal. So really, that's an open question at this point.
Okay, well, like I said, we're going to continue to watch that. And obviously, to figure out what happens after that, of course, because the Vatican investigation is waiting for any other possible appeals with the Australian government. Edward Condon, D.C. Bureau Chief for Catholic News Agency. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks.
The Trump administration is moving to end a limit on how long immigrant children can be kept in detention. The current court agreement requires the government to keep children in the least restrictive setting and to release them as quickly as possible. The new rules would allow the government to hold families in detention for longer than 20 days. The regulations are expected to be formally published Friday and go into effect in 60 days, unless there are legal challenges. President Trump says Jews should not vote for Democrats because they would be disloyal to Israel. Critics say those remarks are anti-Semitic, but President Trump is defending his words. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Why, we asked the president about his comments, and he stood by them today. His critics say he is invoking anti-Semitism by implying American Jews have dual loyalty to the U.S. and Israel. Meanwhile, the president blames Democrats.
Democratic Congresswomen Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar have called for a boycott of Israel. And this week, Omar questioned U.S. aid money going to the country.
We have a responsibility to conduct oversight over our government's foreign policy and what happens with the millions of dollars we send in aid.
When President Trump was asked about those remarks, he criticized the two Muslim congresswomen and their support among Democrats.
Where has the Democratic Party gone? Where have they gone where they're defending these two people over the state of Israel? And I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty.
The president's claim that Jewish people would be disloyal by supporting Democrats brought backlash. The Jewish Democratic Council of America says at a time when anti-Semitic incidents have increased due to the president's emboldening of white nationalism, Trump is repeating an anti-Semitic trope. And the Democratic majority for Israel says false charges of disloyalty over the centuries have led to Jews being murdered, jailed, and tortured. We asked the president to clarify his comments.
If Jews vote for Democrats, are they being disloyal to Israel? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I'd say so, yeah.
Isn't that anti-Semitic to say?
No, it's only in your head. It's only anti-Semitic in your head.
The president went on to say the real anti-Semitic comments are coming from Representatives Tlaib and Omar.
They are so bad for Israel. They are so bad for Jewish people. You take a look at the horrible anti-Semitic statements that they've made.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is steering clear of this controversy, and an Israeli cabinet minister dismissed the matter as internal U.S. politics, saying we have close supporters and friends in both parties. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Pro-abortion group NARAL held a town hall today in Des Moines, Iowa for presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. The South Bend, Indiana mayor criticized the Trump administration for its Protect Life rule governing federal Title X funds.
And at a moment when we have such a sustained assault on reproductive freedom, I believe it is vital that Democrats be vocal in standing up for women and that men running for president be twice as vocal about this issue at this time.
Planned Parenthood announced Monday it quit the federal program, walking away from tens of millions of dollars in grants rather than comply with the rule prohibiting clinics from referring women for abortions. Beijing appealed to Washington today to meet China halfway and end a tariff war. It comes after President Trump said Americans might need to endure economic pain to achieve longer-term benefits.
我们希望美方能同中方相向而行，落实两国元首大阪会晤的共识。
A foreign ministry spokesman expressed hope Washington can restore mutually beneficial trade. The U.S. is pressing China to narrow its trade surplus. Negotiations are deadlocked over how to enforce a deal. More talks are scheduled in Washington next month. Greece says it will not aid an Iranian oil tanker sought after by the United States. Greek officials say they don't want to risk their good relations with the U.S., who have asked them not to provide aid. The ship is currently in the Mediterranean Sea, believed to be headed towards a Greek port. The supertanker left Gibraltar on Sunday after being held up for a month for allegedly attempting to breach EU sanctions on Syria. More than 80 migrants evacuate a rescue ship in Italy after a 19-day standoff. An Italian prosecutor ordered the immediate evacuation of passengers on the Open Arms rescue ship. It came after 15 people jumped overboard yesterday in a desperate bid to escape deteriorating conditions on the boat. The nonprofit organization that runs the ship says in a tweet, quote, "Finally, the nightmare ends and 83 people on board will receive immediate assistance on land." Coming up, Pope Francis speaks of the importance of solidarity between Christians. And protesters in Hong Kong mark 1 month since a violent attack by masked assailants on supporters of the anti-government movement. We have analysis. Pope Francis spoke of the importance of solidarity between Christians during today's meeting with pilgrims. He says God's family is nourished by receiving the sacrament of Christ's body and blood. He also emphasized charity, saying good Christians help the weakest. Hong Kong riot police faced off today with protesters occupying a suburban train station. Police arrived to disperse the protesters who had gathered earlier at the Yuen Long station to stage a sit-in. Today's demonstrations came 1 month after masked assailants carried out a violent attack on supporters of the anti-government movement. Joining me now by Skype from Hong Kong is Claudia Rosett, Foreign Policy Fellow with the Independent Women's Forum and a columnist for PJ Media. Claudia, welcome in. You covered today's demonstration at the Yuen Long subway station. Describe the protests. What are you hearing from folks there?
Incredible frustration that the government of Hong Kong, which is a puppet government appointed by Beijing, is not giving an inch on anything. Lots of words, actually not even lots of words, some words, but nothing since the bill that sort of triggered this that would have permitted extradition to China was suspended by the chief executive, Carrie Lam, in mid-June. And since then, no other demands have been met. They're all reasonable demands. Basically, they boil down to they want to preserve their freedoms. They want democracy in Hong Kong. And they would like the government to get rid of, sort of fully withdraw this draconian law that they tried to ram through. None of that's happened. So the protests keep going on.
And you lived in Hong Kong for many years. You're back now covering these pro-democracy protests, which are now entering its third month. Just to follow up with that, what do you think is fueling the demand to take to the streets over and over again?
Because they have no other way to make themselves heard. Because this is a free society. These are people who really understand the workings of democracy, a free society. You know, they were born under or inherited the British system. And even though they didn't have full democracy here, they had the backing of British parliamentary democracy. That was the way that they grew up. They're really steeped in it. And they value it. They really understand what they've got. You know, nothing concentrates the mind like having the People's Republic of China ingesting the place where you live, which is what's happening here. And they are looking for any way to stop this. And many of them are telling me that even if they don't see a way, even if it won't work, they're still going to do this. They basically say, this is a fight we have to fight. We have to stand up for our freedom. And they really are. The chants you keep hearing are stand with Hong Kong, free Hong Kong, or this local slang Cantonese for add oil, which means basically keep going. That's what's happening.
And we notice in these protests, people of all ages taking part. Why do you think this movement is appealing to so many people of different generations?
Because you really do Hong Kong is an amazing society. This is self-selected people who fled China for greater freedom. They're descendants who grew up in that ethos, and they face a terrible thing. I mean, China is the world's most powerful tyranny, and what they're doing is really heroic here. They're going up against a brutal dictatorship, which 30 years ago slaughtered its own people in the streets of its own capital to stop a movement for democracy, and has tolerated nothing like that since. And they are standing here in Hong Kong defying the dictatorship of China. Basically, they're doing it because they think it's right.
Right. We're going to continue to follow this. Like I say, it's so important that we keep our eye on this pro-democracy protest and the movement, as well as obviously what Beijing is trying to do. Claudia Rosett, Foreign Policy Fellow with the Independent Women's Forum, coming to us from Hong Kong. Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you.
Up next, Loyola University Chicago's Sister Jean shares her secret to a long life as she reaches a major milestone. We're going to take another look now at today's announcement by the Trump administration that it plans to end a long-standing federal agreement that limits how long immigrant children can be kept in detention. Joining me now with his analysis is Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Matthew, welcome back. There are already concerns that this change in the policy would allow migrant families who cross the border illegally to be detained indefinitely. Do we know yet if these new regulations will include any kind of time limit and how long families can be held and how exactly it'll work?
Well, I don't believe there's going to be a time limit. What this regulation does is allow the government to legally detain family units, which is something they have been unable to do since 2015 when a district court judge on the Ninth Circuit decided that the Flores decision back from 1997 applied to families with minors. And that gave us the rolling, kind of the snowball effect that led to the controversial family separation policy last year. And now this is the rule that is finally going to be able to allow the government to end the family separations by detaining the families as a unit as their claims for asylum are adjudicated.
Obviously, there's so many people that are concerned about this. Democrats say the current rules are critical to ensuring the well-being of detained children, and there are already indications this will be challenged in court. How quickly could this take effect?
Well, there will be court challenges, and I expect this will travel through the court system. So once it's validated by the Supreme Court, which I assume it will be, then it would be going into effect. Look, this rule has already been promulgated for the notice and comment period. It received 100,000 comments, almost all of them negative, basically from activist groups opposed to the administration. Now they're implementing the rule, and what this does is it protects the children because it keeps the children with their families, and it also sets minimum standards, which are pretty high, good standards for the conditions of the facilities in which these families are going to be detained. What this rule hurts is the illegal trafficking in human beings that has been going on for years, exploiting these loopholes in our immigration law. Those traffickers and coyotes, they're the ones who are going to be hurt by this regulation, not the children, not the families.
So that then seems to be the thing that the Democrats and the activists against the Trump administration are missing.
Yes, they're missing it. They want, all you need to do is listen to the Democrats. They don't want any consequences for the illegal crossing of the border, right? And so if they were really interested in protecting these children, they would like this rule. All this rule does is get us to the status quo ante of 2014, when similar policies were implemented by Jay Johnson and Barack Obama's administration.
Okay, so then taking this policy, how does this sort of fit into the Trump administration's overall strategy to crack down on illegal immigration?
It's one component of basically an invisible wall that the Trump administration has been constructing. You combine this with the public charge rule, which was announced last week. When you combine this with the deal with the Guatemalan government, which encourages or requires people to make their asylum claims in Guatemala. When you combine it with the deal with the Mexican government that has secured Mexico's southern border and also required asylees to remain in Mexico while their claims are being adjudicated, the Trump administration is taking a multivarious approach to reducing the illegal immigrant traffic on our southern border and the exploitations by human traffickers, not the immigrants, the human traffickers and coyotes who are exploiting these loopholes in our immigration law.
As we head into 2020, tell me about sort of the political ramifications of this law and the overall administration's efforts and how it's going to play out.
Well, immigration will be a controversial issue. Americans support immigration by and large. But the truth is that they're also leery of some of the radical proposals you hear coming from the Democratic Party, which would decriminalize border crossings, which would abolish immigrations and customs enforcement, which would essentially create an open border in the American Southwest. That is something that I think even voters who are supportive of immigrants and immigration will reject.
Okay, obviously we'll be watching all these important issues. Matthew Continetti, Editor-in-Chief of the Washington Free Beacon, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thanks.
Finally tonight, Sister Jean Schmidt gained national attention as chaplain of the Loyola Chicago basketball team last year when the team reached the NCAA Final Four. Today, she turns 100 years old and is sharing her secret to longevity.
I love working with these young people, and I think that's what kept my heart young, not my body young, but kept my heart young all these years.
Catholic University's president spoke to Sister Jean about her incredible life, and Lego is honoring the 100-year-old as well with a statue made of thousands of plastic Lego bricks. The 2.5 feet tall statue will be on display at the Loyola Chicago Arena at the start of the men's basketball season. And all of us at EWTN News Nightly would like to wish Sister Jean a happy and blessed 100th birthday. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.